Okay, 1949, I'm red-faced because I'm embarrassed. We purchased the Darcy Hutchinson Pettigrew purchased the Myers Ranch in 1949, and this building came along with it. Now, as farmers, my grandfather, Bill Darcy, and Percy didn't want the mansion, but Ernie Myers insisted that they include it. And so we ended up being the proud owners of this. And growing up as a kid, there was a bowling alley downstairs. Dad would take us down there and we'd bowl in this little bowling alley. But the place was entirely terrible disrepair. So that's just kind of the background why I'm particularly happy to be here. Now I'm going to start some introductions. Okay? I'm going to start with the family, which is simply most everybody here from the Delta that we're meeting from. I'm going to start with the Honorable State Senator from the state of California, Teddy Gaines. The Honorable Assemblywoman from the great state of California, Beth Gaines. They're both celebrating their 29th anniversary today. And then I want to introduce Bob and Winnie Gaines. Ted's parent and Margaret's parents and Claire's parents are here as well. And Bob and Winnie are farmers themselves. They have a walnut farm north of Colusa on the Sacramento River. And so they've been farming that for decades. Anyway, it's a wonderful thing. And this is Claire Andrews. Did I introduce you yet? Yes.
Well, I introduced myself.
You did, okay. And this is Todd Andrews, Claire's husband. And there's Winnie. Hi, Winnie. These are the Brownridges, Sue and Charlie Brownridge. They were married here 22 years ago. Okay, and then we have Deke Kastner here. He attended our last summer party. Deke is very good friends of ours. Margaret and I are godmother and godfather to two of their girls. Deke lost his wife, Carol, in 2008 from that dreaded disease we know as melanoma. And so we continue to bring him to as many events as we can. Husbands, hold on to your wives closely. Single women, you're on your own. Okay. I want to introduce Nancy here. This is, I think, for the Delta folks, everyone really knows Nancy Pettigrew Moser very well. I mean, Nancy knew me before I knew myself. But Nancy celebrated her 99th birthday on July 29th. Wow. Stanford University called Nancy and said, Nancy, as soon as you die, you have to tell your doctor to chop off your head. And she said, what? And so anyway, she went to Dr. Go, who's up here in Cortland, and said, Dr. Go, as soon as I die, my head has to be fresh. I want you to chop it off, put it in a bag, and put it in a refrigerator. True story. And he refused.
I don't blame him.
Where are we? Carol Werder. Carol and Joe Werder from Walnut Grove. I've known them my whole life. Their kids as well. 90 in the Delta, and then as a good one, your family since the 1850s over near Woodbridge. Really great. And these are farmers who've been doing this forever. And so you can imagine how staunchly against these twin tunnels that we've got here. All of them made it. Ted and Beth have promised me they're not voting for anything that has to do with those tunnels. Yeah, very good. And this is my Aunt Kathy Hutchinson. She was married to my Uncle Bill for years. My uncle was divorced some years ago, and then my uncle married Kathy, who was 20 years younger than him, that lucky guy, right? So Kathy Graham grew up on Sutter Island, up here, and Debbie Elliott now lives in the house that Kathy grew up in. And her parents are very good friends of ours, and love her.
We call her Becky. Becky because she's been here forever. Her father, Bill Beck, Bill and Dorothy Beck, started farming just down the river here. And the farm is still there, it's going beautifully, and Becky lives there, and we'll all.
And she's your third cousin.
Yes, I'm the second, right, yeah, second cousin.
That's why we're second cousin once removed, I just remembered that.
So here's the Elliott. So here's Bonnie Elliott, Debbie Elliott, Rodney. You didn't get the Elliott name.
No, it's been easier just to change mine.
So Debbie kept her Elliott name. The Elliots have been farming here and on Sutter Island since the 1850s. Right? So tremendous. And they, for all that time, they had never sold a piece of property. They've kept adding to it. I mean, it's just extraordinary. If you think of the legacy of that, it's just fabulous. By the way, Debbie has on the market Carol's house over in Walnut Grove. And Carol has moved to Stockton, and Carol would like to sell her house. It's beautiful. And she has a flyer, so if any of you are interested in a house in the Delta.
And it's a boat dock.
And it has a boat dock. Okay, then we have here the Uphams, so Everett and Mary Upham. Everett and Mary Upham live down in Rio Vista, and their daughter Ann is married to my brother Lindsay. They have been farming, so they own Sherman Island, down the southernmost island in the Delta. And Bab's grandfather reclaimed that, and correct me if I got that wrong. It was just a swamp, and it reclaimed it, built their own levees by selling some of their property between Fairfield and Rio Vista. They were able to fund building up they reclaimed the island for farming, and then they continued to farm it for years and years and years, and are farming it today. It's just, that's it.
The Department of Water Resources took us off.
Yes, the Department of Water Resources came and it took some of your property,
The
right?
whole island. That was the start of
But anyway, that's a great story, to literally reclaim an island, the most southern island in the Delta, which is fabulous. The neat thing is, Bob is the great-grandson of Charlie Crocker, one of the big four. Huntington, Crocker, Hopkins, and... Thank you. That's right. Huntington, Crocker, Hopkins, Stanford. And so Charlie Crocker was the nuts and bolts behind the railroad. He was an exceptionally good executor, planner, and he did a great job at that. And the neat connection with the Delta farmers is that the fruit that we shipped east went on the train in Roseville, shipped up from Walnut Grove to Roseville, where there was ice, and then shipped across to over to Elko, Nevada, re-iced, and then to Chicago and re-iced, and then to New York. All done. Without that railroad, I don't think refrigerated cars came in until after World War II. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My sister Sarah Clifford and Ken Clifford, her husband, and their son Paul. And Sarah grew up in Walnut Grove as well as I did. And so Denny Leary owns Leary Ranch across the island, is the longest standing farmer on Grand Island. Is that right?
still
I
standing.
have no idea.
Yes. I think it was somewhere, but
1870s.
long, 1870s. Another one. So, thank you for being here, Denny. And this is Gene Brown. So Gene Brown grew up in Humboldt County and then married, got to know Arthur Brown, who many of you know, at Stanford, and then married Arthur and moved to Walnut Grove. The interesting thing here is it has to do with Arthur's grandfather. Arthur's grandfather's name was Arthur, and his father was Alex Brown. Arthur, the farmers back then, there was no bank, so the farmers back in the early days gave cash to Arthur Brown, Art's grandfather, who was son to Alex Brown, and for safekeeping. That got to be so difficult that Alex said, Arthur, I want you to contract with Wells Fargo in San Francisco and take the cash down to them. And he said, well, what about a stagecoach? Don't they have stagecoaches? And so he talked about Wells Fargo didn't have a stagecoach that came through Walnut Grove. So they got the cash down to Wells Fargo, and that got to be difficult. And so Alex said, well, let's open a bank. And so they opened the Bank of Alex Brown in what year, Kathy?
They named it after his father, Alex Brown, who was against the whole idea.
Yeah.
But they finally convinced him, and he underwrote them a little
Yeah.
too. And so in order to thank him, they named the bank after him.
Yeah.
Although Alex Brown was not involved with the bank.
And John Brown was that
John Brown, his son John. Very interesting. Bob and I have gotten to know each other over the last year pretty well, and we spent a bunch of time on the phone the other day. The neat connection here with Bob is that he sold to all the farmers this material to cover up tomatoes, for example. So back then they would plant tomatoes by seed. Then when the sapling would come up, it was prone to frost and would die. So Bob made this almost a gauze type material. And this gauze, thousands of feet of it, put it over he rent it out to the farmers and to cover up their crops. The interesting story is that Joe Gwerler was dispatched his wife Carol up to Bob's shop to rent some of this material, and Carol dutifully went up to his shop, bought the material, and came back down and handed the $3,000 bill to Joe. It was a very good day for Bob.
Did you know that story? I liked it.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, all my Delta friends. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Kandaharians, for having us as well, for all of Delta friends. Appreciate it. Thank you. The newsletter, and she was the president of it, and she is going to give us a little history on the mansion.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, well, the mansion was built as a result of a sort of a social rivalry. Both Louis Myers, Louis as we always knew him, and William Smith across the island here on the Sacramento River, where Salisbury is now, were sons of German immigrants. And William Smith and his wife got the big idea that they'd remodel their modest farmhouse into a castle that looked like, a castle on the Rhine. It looked like something on the Rhine. So they hired Henry Mortensen from Rio Vista to redesign this house. And they put in a ballroom and an elevator shaft, although the elevator was never installed. And on the third floor, there was a big walkway around it, and instead of having a normal railing, they had castellations all around it, so it looked like a castle. Well, I was always told it was Mrs. Myers, but could have been both, and they decided they weren't going to be outdone. So they were going to build a house. So they built this house. And they put in a sprung dance floor, the bowling alley that Don told you about. And as Don said, imported artisans from Europe to do plaster work and so on and so forth. They had farming property here, real estate in San Francisco. And when, as Don mentioned, the agricultural depression following World War I hit, they couldn't pay the bills. So they had to sell this place. They sold it, and the ranch, all their properties. I was told that Louis Myers committed suicide. I don't know where his wife went, but she went off somewhere. And, but I do know about some of his children. His son, Lou Jr., he was married. I guess his wife died, or they were divorced, or separate, or something. Anyway, his ex-wife married Edwin Bedell, Sacramento. Bedell's restaurant at 11th L in Sacramento. And their daughter Henrietta married and went to Idaho. And their daughter Petronella married John Diggs at Thompson Diggs Hardware store in Sacramento. And I knew her daughters. Anyway, so then this house sort of, it went into a decline. Now the Smiths across the way, they kept going. And William Smith had inherited this sizable fortune from his father, who had interest in the California Transportation Company, as well as lots of acreage, they farmed and all. And he, of course, lost it all in the Depression, having spent, around the time of World War I, over $500,000 remodeling the house, which was a huge, huge sum then. And so his son, George Smith, he came back from all the schools he was going to in the East, and he went up, he lived until he died, in the old family house built in 1870, just outside of Portland, where he farmed a little bit of what was left and dabbled in Republican politics. And this house just went into decay and disuse. As Don said, used as a granary once and various things. Nancy said when she first saw it, it was just full of all sorts of varmints and their leftovers and their kids and kin who hadn't made it. So, you know, all my growing up years, this house was a white elephant. No one knew what to do with it. Finally, in the mid-50s, I can't remember exactly when, a couple of people started to become interested in it. There were several different operators who would open it up for private parties. I remember my grandparents, the senior Walter Joneses, had a party here with a couple of other couples around that time. And it really didn't take off in any way until Terry Black and his associates bought it. And then it's just improved since then. But before that, it was just the mansion, and it was just derelict sitting there like a huge white elephant out in the middle of nowhere. And that's about all I know about it. I mean, others might know more.